We're doing a survey, really, of what it means to live a holy life, and not only looking at what the holiness of God is like, but also determining how does that holiness reflect inside of us. The Spirit living within us, how does it bring about holiness within us? And so we were looking at the fruit of the Spirit, and last week we looked at joy. This week we're going to look kind of at a mirror image of that, and that is peace. What is peace all about? It's a theme that runs throughout all of Scripture. Probably one of the most famous passages that deals with that from the Old Testament is the prayer that we've sung before. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. That's probably as good a definition of peace as any. It's just not whether we're at war with a neighboring country. It's that internal sense of being at peace, of being in sync, of all things coming together and developing a fulfilled life. And that's everything from international peace to security of work and the joy of a family and just being at peace with God. What a wonderful concept that is about being. The word from the Old Testament that appears more than not about that is the word I know you've heard before, shalom. And that is, if you're in a Jewish community, that word is spoken countless times. Even in Christian communities, the idea of shalom carries with it a really complex understanding of what peace is all about. In its widest meaning, it means everything from good health to prosperity to security, and of course, salvation, being in a right relationship with God. And if you want to compare what it means to be at peace and what it means to live a life not at peace, there's no greater picture of that, no stark contrast about that than when you look at the story of Adam and Eve. They were in the garden. It's from Genesis chapter 2. They're in the garden, and this is what it means to live at peace, right? They were caretakers of this garden, which means that they didn't have to force nature to do what it was designed to do. They were just the recipients of its blessing. And they were in this garden with every kind of tree and all kind of fruit. And it says that the rivers that ran through the garden nourished the garden. The soil was rich. It was well watered. Everything was at peace in that garden. And then they met the serpent, right? And the serpent said, you know, when God told you not to eat that fruit, he was really trying to keep you from enjoying something that he didn't want you to have. And when Adam and Eve began to consider that possibility, that there was more to be had, that they were being held back, things were being hidden from them, they lost a little bit of peace. And so they took the fruit that was forbidden for them, and they ate from the fruit. And then all of a sudden, they began to realize their own desperation. They were naked, and they realized that, and they felt shame about that. And they hid in the garden, and they began to lose a little bit of peace. And then God comes walking through the garden, it says, and looking for Adam and Eve, who prior to that would run to his side and to cling to him, to be with him. And now they're nowhere to be found. And when he finds them, he discovers what they'd done. They had eaten of the forbidden fruit. His answer to them is stark. What have you done? And at that point, fingers begin to point. Now all of a sudden there's interrelational conflict. It was a woman you gave me. She's the one who forced this on me. No, it wasn't me. It was a serpent. And everybody's casting blame. And all of a sudden there's a little bit less peace to be had. And that's when God expels them from this lush and perfect garden. And life becomes difficult. Now they no longer have nature cooperating with them. Now all of a sudden you've got to toil in the dirt, and rains don't always come when you want them, and sometimes they come when you don't want them, and life is not easy. And then childbirth is difficult and painful, and what should bring you joy is bringing you pain, and all of a sudden Adam and Eve began to realize this is not Eden anymore. This is not life at peace. And I think we struggle in search of peace sometimes. How about your job? Is that a source of peace for you? Your boss? Your coworkers? Sometimes that's the stress giver in your life. If it's not that, it might be your home life, your spouse or your children. And now all of a sudden what was intended to bring you peace and joy is bringing you conflict and arguments and disobedience and disrespect. And all of a sudden this is not a source of peace. And if that's not enough, our own bodies begin to betray us, right? We moan and groan and we ache and we can't see anymore. And all of a sudden it's like everything is failing around us. And now there's even less peace to be had. And then Satan comes along and hurls temptations at us. And disappointments and frustrations and doubts come our way. And then all of a sudden peace seems almost elusive for us. And all we're looking for is just a little bit of peace in our life. Just room to breathe. A season when it seems like things come together. And that's the disconnect, I think. It's this difference between seeing life as we wish it was and knowing how far away life that we face every day truly is. There's a story in the Gospels that speaks to this disconnect here. Jesus and his disciples are on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. They're coming back home across the sea. It's a big body of water. You can barely see to the other side over there. And as they're in this boat, packed with sweaty disciples, a squall comes up on the Sea of Galilee. It's known for that at times, and they're dangerous squalls. And when fishermen are scared of the weather, you know you should be scared of the weather too. And so they're doing everything they can do to keep the boat from being capsized. And in the middle of this chaos, in the middle of nature not cooperating, in the middle of remembering and realizing their own frailties and their own risk in life, excuse me for a minute, they look at the back of the boat and what do they see? Jesus is asleep. I know how the story ends. But I'm with the disciples here 100%, all right? They turn to him and they shout at him and they say, "Don't you even care whether we live or die?" I mean, they're like saying and shouting, any reasonable person would not be at peace in this moment. And that's when Jesus speaks those immortal words, right? They're not in your NIV. You got to go back to the King James, okay? Peace, be still. And I know the text says that he's speaking to the winds. Peace, be still. But I got a feeling he's speaking a little bit to the disciples too. Peace, be still. So the question is, how can someone in the midst of the storms of life, how can they experience peace? How can we still sleep at night when it seems like our boat's about ready to capsize? Well, to me, it's all about our expectations. So many, many years ago, we were first married. I learned the lesson early. We were going down to Florida on the East Coast, and we decided we'd go down the West Coast and trek across, and we were going to spend the night in a nice little town called Cedar Key. I don't know that it's still there after these hurricanes came through. But we found this hotel there, just a unique hotel, just a special little place on the internet. And we decided, thank you, man, we were going to go there and stay the night. And I researched it. I came up with all the plans. It was beautiful. It was a place that whenever Jimmy Buffett goes down there, That's where Jimmy Buffett stays. How wrong could it be? So we show up there at Cedar Key, and we enter this hotel, and it's like 1950s, beautiful, okay? Just back, and we go up to the room, and we're fairly newly married, so I'm kind of, ta-da, and we open the door, and there is mosquito netting over the bed. Now, Jim, you don't.
That's pretty romantic.
Okay. There's mosquito netting over the bed. And there's not an air-conditioned breeze anywhere in the room. And Brenda turns to me and she goes, "What is this?" I said, "Well, we're just going to stay one night. It's an experience." She goes, "It is not my experience." So I had to slink back downstairs to the desk and tell these people that we had made the reservation with that we're not staying in their hotel. And we found a Motel 6 somewhere. You know what? Here's the thing about it. Motel 6 may look pretty bad unless your room has mosquito netting over the bed. If you were expecting the Ritz and got Motel 6, you'd go, no way. But if you were leaving mosquito netting, you're thinking, this is civilization again. It's all about your expectations. And so this coming Wednesday evening, if you aren't coming on Wednesdays to Jerry and Lynn's seminar, I tell you what, I know Jerry, by marriage related to him. It's easy to take him for granted sometimes. But I got it every time I sit through their material. I say, this is top shelf material here. This is great information and helpful information. So this coming Wednesday, they're going to be talking about, the title of it is, "This is Not What I Expected." And it's all about unmet expectations. And so I hope you'll come and hear what they have to say, but I'll kind of tease it a little bit today and just say, you know what, it's important that we understand what our expectations are. So here's a couple of expectations that Scripture lays out for us that we need to understand. One is this: life is not always easy. And I think we kind of live under the illusion that life's going to work out, that things are going to be okay, that if I work hard enough or long enough, then all my ducks are going to get in a row. Everything's going to fall into place. I think I believed that until I was in my mid-40s and began to realize that I'm fighting the same battles decade after decade. And you kind of see that with your newborns, right? They're beautiful, you love them, but it doesn't take much that they're bawling about something, right? They're hungry. They haven't seen your face in 5 seconds. They've got a messy diaper. And we're reminded by that. We no longer live in the Garden of Eden. Your kids get older, and their favorite phrase at moments of frustration is, "This is not fair." And your reply as parents is? I don't know where we learned that, but we all know it, okay? Life is not fair. Now, I don't suggest that you take your perfectly content 5-year-old and sit them down and teach them the lesson that life is not fair. But I do think that as they begin to question the fairness of life, it's good for us to remind them, let me explain this. Let me set your expectations at ease here. Life is not fair. It's interesting for me how much peace I can experience whenever I realize that life is not fair. You ever go to the DMV and get frustrated that you're number 42 and they're serving number 2? And you just say, this is intolerable. Guess what? It's tolerable. Because life is not fair. Do you ever get frustrated when you pass up a gas station that morning on the way to work because you're late, and on the way back home, the gas is 30 cents higher? This is not fair. Yeah, you're right. Life is not fair. As Jesus was nearing his crucifixion, he sits down with his disciples. John lays out a lengthy conversation he has with them. And here's the things, bullet points of what he's telling them. He says, I'm going to be leaving you soon. I'm not going to be here forever. He says, and you guys are going to deny knowing me. And he says, the world out here that seems so enthralled with the miracles, they're going to start hating you. In fact, you're going to be kicked out of the synagogues that you've been teaching in. You're going to be targeted for death. Just a few of the happy bullet points he's sharing, okay? And here's what he says. This is from John 16, verse 33. He goes, I have told you these things so that you may have peace. I don't see much peace in that. Now, that's not all he told them. He told them some things that we're looking at in our class on the Holy Spirit, all right? But he gives them all of this dire future stories, and he says, you can be at peace about that. I think because you know it's coming. You know that's what's in the future. So he says bluntly to them, he says, here in this world, you will face many trials and sorrows. So let me tell you, if you did not know that already, I'm here to share you the good news, all right? Life is not always easy. And the sooner that we can acknowledge that, the more at peace we can be. You see, peace is when everything is working as it should work. Well, a life that struggles with sorrow and pain and loss and hardship, that's how life post-Eden is supposed to work. And when I realize that and come to terms with it, I can be at peace. The second thing is this. We already know how the story ends. So let me tell you, not just this year, I struggle watching the Chiefs play football. Do you guys, is that a struggle for you? I don't know if it's part of their game plan or what. I don't know if they get together and they say, look, let us be 10 points down with 5 minutes left in the game and then turn it around. But I am not at peace watching them play. Now, this last week is an exception, but I am not at peace watching. But this last week, I didn't watch it. I had something going on. I said, I'm not going to watch the game. That night, I'm in bed. I pull it up on my phone. I see the score. They won decisively. But you know, the game wasn't always so decisive. They were only up by 3 a couple of times in the game. If I had watched the game, I might would have been on the edge of my seat at those moments, because they got a track record of having victory almost snatched out of their hands, okay? But you know what? I didn't experience any angst, no frustration, no wringing of hands, no pacing around the living room. You don't want to watch me watch football, okay? None of that experience, because I knew the final score. I knew what was happening, and I was at peace. Wouldn't it be wonderful if at the moment of life's most uncertain crises, when it looks like things could go either way. Wouldn't you, if at that moment we knew how the story would end? When your company is downsizing and you don't know if it's going to be you losing your job or your coworker losing your job, wouldn't it be nice to know how that story ends? When you're struggling to pay your bills and you're hoping to get a raise at work, wouldn't it be nice to know how that story ends? When you're battling your teenagers and you've heard the possibility that somewhere down the road you and your kids are like peers and life is good, but at this moment it seems like it's nowhere to be seen. Wouldn't it be nice to know how that story ends? In addition to teaching his disciples that life is not fair, he also tells them how the story will end. In this world, you will have troubles and sorrows. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Horatio Spafford had his share of troubles. He was a businessman in Chicago, lost his rental properties during the Chicago fire. As he's trying to rebuild from that, 2 years later, there's a national recession and economy tanks. He's trying to rebuild and can't rebuild. Soon after that, Dwight Moody, a preacher from England's hosting this revival. And he says, let's go there. Refuel, work, serve. And so he packs up his stuff, his wife, his kids, to get on a ship and travel across the ocean to go to England and serve in that campaign. But last minute, financial crises at home erupts and he can't go right then. So he sends his family across. He says, I'll catch up with you later. But on the way across the ocean, the ship that his wife and family traveled on struck another vessel and sank within minutes. 226 people died, including all 4 of his daughters. There is no reasonable cause for peace in this story. There's no reason for comfort. There's no sense that, yes, life is coming together, going the way it should go. This is clicking on all cylinders right here. None of that. And that's why it is shocking to hear, and I don't use that term lightly, it's shocking to hear that when Horatio quickly concluded his business and got on a ship to rush to be at his wife's side who had survived, as they neared the latitude and longitude as to where the ship went down and his daughters are buried underneath the sea at that place and time, he writes these famous words: when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to know, it is well. It is well with my soul. What would cause a man at this oceanic cemetery to write those words? This is not the peace you get from good fortune. This is the peace that only comes from worshiping a good God. The God that tells us that although life is going to be difficult at times, we know how our story is going to end. And that final chapter was written 2,000 years ago, really, when Jesus died on a cross in Jerusalem. His blood shed there to announce to the entire world that guilt and shame from sin is something we don't have to wear any longer. We can be free of that. 3 days later, he's back alive again to tell all of us who struggle with the ticking clock of our own lives that deadline is not the end of us, but we can continue past that. There's a verse in his poem that does not make the psalm books, but I wanted to read it to you. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ hath regarded my helpless estate and has shed his own blood for my soul. Now, do you have that kind of peace? In the midst of struggles and uncertainty, grief or sorrow, are you finding within you this peace that passes understanding, provided by the Spirit himself, that allows you to say, it's well with my soul? If that's not within your grasp, if you haven't experienced that at moments of crisis in your life, we invite you to come and discover the peace that God has to offer. The denial of self and the adoration toward God, the death in baptism, the resurrected to a new life, changes our outlook completely. It reminds us that even though life is not always joyful, the rest of the story has already been told and we know the ending. And when we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, we can breathe with peace that God's forever tomorrow has already been secured. If you need that peace, then why don't you let us know? Either talk to one of our shepherds in the back of the building or come down to the front pew and claim the peace that God has to offer you. Let's stand and sing this song together.